All right. And we are live. So, as you all are coming in, getting settled, it is 12 noon Central. Oh my goodness. Look, I'm so excited. I'm forgetting which time zone I'm in. It's 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And I am thrilled to the gills to have with me a new friend and a new colleague, Dr. Larry McEvoy. So here's what I'm going to suggest that you do, that you take a moment, grab your ink pen, grab a something to write on, your favorite notebook, your diary from 7th grade, whatever it is for you, but you want to go ahead and get it close to you, because we are going to be privy to some wisdom nuggets here that will blow your mind. So take a moment and do that. And Larry, while we get warmed up, I just want to simply say thank you for joining me in the studio. I am, as I said, super excited to have you. And just a couple of housekeeping pieces here before we jump into the conversation. If you all are joining us on Facebook, Facebook is having some algorithm challenges here with the platform that we're in, StreamYard. So I'm going to suggest, I did put into the Facebook post about today the YouTube link. So it might be a little smoother for you to actually check it out via the YouTube channel as opposed to Facebook. Number two, if you are coming in, you can certainly feel free to post comments as we're going through. If you're with us live, if you're watching us during the replay, go ahead and just let us know if you're watching during the replay. Preface your comment, question with hashtag replay. And I do check those periodically. If I get some really juicy questions, I will be sure to follow up with Dr. McEvoy and see what we can share with you about that. So about in response to your question. And then, of course, thirdly, just remember, we always like to keep it positive here in the Practicing Positivity Studio. So everything can be said, and we like to keep it focused on saying it with respect. So that said, that's kind of the housekeeping pieces. And I'll go ahead and want to just give you guys a quick reminder about kind of who we are and kind of what this whole thing is about. So remember, get in the conversation, post your greetings, post your questions, any ideas, any elaboration that you want to hear, or anything of that nature, or any contribution from your own wisdom, from your own practice, from your own leadership journey that you want to add to the conversation. We're treating this like, hey, we're kind of co-creating in the kitchen together. So if you have some good things that you want to throw into the pan, don't hesitate. Put it in the chat and we'll bring it in. And if it's really juicy, let us know and I will send you a link. Just put it in the chat. I'll send you a link and you can actually come into the studio with us today. So that said, I just want to let you guys know where you are and why we are here. The Practicing Positivity Studio, as you know, it's a shared learning lab for building a lifelong practice that nurtures life-giving forces within and all around us. So what we do here is bring people here into the studio that have a new perspective, that have some resources, that have some tools, that have some things that you can add to your daily professional and personal practice that will allow you not to wait for the planets to align to enter a state of positivity, but to create that state of positivity for yourself and those around you on demand, and certainly when the circumstances call for it. So, Dr. Larry, you still want to be on? You still in the right place? Hearing that build up?
I'm in. Oh, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So our goal here, you all, is to discover, uncover, and recover those things that give life, zest, vigor, and vitality to living. No point to be in the game if you feel like you just have to trudge your way through every second. We want you to be living life with vitality and vigor. And there is no better person than I can think of than this gentleman right here. So today's learning lab is about epidemic leadership. How to Lead Infectiously in the Era of Big Problems, by my guest here, Dr. Larry McEvoy. And I just want to give you a little bit of background here. Dr. Larry is an emergency room physician, a healthcare CEO, an entrepreneur, a lifelong horseman, and someone who taking good care of the earth is a part of his responsibility and gift in the world. So Larry's interests, I love this, Larry, in your bio. Larry's interests lie at the intersection of business, biology, and health. And these have forged his thinking about the need, now check this out, y'all, to innovate leadership exponentially for the challenges of the 21st century. His work focuses on one of my favorite words, regenerating organizations, companies, and communities to exponential health and vigor. Clue in, wait for it, where performance, learning, and vitality rise in parallel and are abundant, infectious, sustained, and come on, Larry, and sustaining. So I will put Larry's full bio in the description after we're done today. But that said, Larry, I cannot wait to get into this. Now, here's how I'd like to do it, just to get everybody on the same page. You've got some really compelling concepts here in this book. So I want to just say again, welcome, but I'd like us to start with just kind of laying the groundwork. Epidemic leadership. Where did you come up with those terms, and how did that come together for you?
Well, I think, Nicole, it started years ago when I was having one of those human experiences that we all have that was both unique to me and universal to being a human. I was working in the emergency department. I'd been out of my residency several years, so I wasn't a newbie anymore. I wasn't old. And I was really proud to be part of a team that had done a lot of good work. We had an environment that wasn't as capable as it needed to be. It wasn't resilient and agile and adaptive and all those words that we, sort of fling around. So we'd done some work and we were pretty good. And one Saturday night came, and I think we were as good that night as we ever could be at an individual level. Right, every nurse was really on his or her game. I was rolling. The patients were getting good care. I mean, we were clicking. And I had this really bad feeling. And you say, well, this is a positivity podcast. Well, how did I go negative in an environment where we were kind of having this peak experience? And really what happened was I looked around the emergency department that night, and I looked out the door, and I looked at the next day and the next day, and I thought of all the emergency departments that were open all over the country. And I realized that we had all this goodwill, mine, the nurses, the patients, the families. We had all this skill, and we had put all this work in to be a really strong collaborative team. And with all of those things, we were still getting buried. And I don't mean buried as in we couldn't get a break, or the care was bad that night, or we wouldn't go home and see our families, or, life wouldn't be coming right back tomorrow. It was a sense that the way we were approaching things, although really well intended and really well fortified with technical skill, and even well supported with really strong attention to the way we had created a professional community, a team that could really go, we were just outgunned. I mean, we were just being overwhelmed by this wave. And I think anyone who works in healthcare has experienced that. And I think that's an experience many of us have these days. I mean, we live in this world where the problems are really big. They're everywhere. There's not a little easy button like you can find at Staples or Office Depot or wherever that simple button, easy button is, and just hit it and boom, it all goes away. And so we're faced with a choice, which is, do we sort of give up and put our heads down and climb under our favorite rock and find our cozy spot? And there's some wisdom to that, certainly, the whole self-care bit and doing what you can do and not trying to control the world and all those things. Or do we try to go really, really big by ourselves? And both of those, to me, at the time, just seem to fit. Again, you mentioned I'm a physician, so my whole life around health. And health is a 5-letter word that's easy to say, but it can mean a lot of things. I mean, you can have a healthy economy or an unhealthy economy. You can have healthy communities or unhealthy communities. You can be medically healthy, but you can be, culturally sick. So I'm really interested in what does health look like at a comprehensive, integral level, everything, everywhere, all the time as we move through our lives. And as I was thinking about that and thinking about the leadership challenge, because I was in a leadership position at the time, I thought we just need a better set of rules. We somehow need to match these diffuse exponential challenges with a creative response that's equally exponential and equally diffuse and equally hard to put down. And from that night on, as my career went forward and I had the privilege and obligation of having bigger and bigger jobs, I was sort of faced with that choice, right? Hide in my office or my ER or wherever my spot was and pontificate about the world and let it do its thing, or grab a big old megaphone, walk out, announce that I was in control, I had the answer, it would get fixed. And I just knew those weren't going to work. But one thing that happened was I started thinking about the world that I had grown up in professionally and personally, which was really the world of biology. And I'd noticed for a long time, and I started thinking more seriously, biology kind of has this figured out. Biology is this, I like to say, operating system, because we understand the different software and hardware and operating systems and programs because it's such a part of our lexicon anymore. I started thinking, everywhere biology is at play, it adapts, it's stable, it keeps rolling on, it figures out whatever you throw at it, and it's unstoppable. And, in a negative sense, that's what epidemics are. They're these waves that come out of nowhere with really nothing but an idea. And they, through this process of infection and contagion, they spread everywhere. And they spread everywhere, even though there's resistance to them. And you and I have some sort of resistance to everything that's out there that would like to hurt us. It's called our immune system. And it's constantly on, and it's constantly surveilling, and it is looking out for us. And it's saying to the world, you don't get to get in. Well, at an organizational or team or community level, we have immune systems as well. And epidemics don't care. Our immune systems put down plenty of epidemics, but when you look at the successful ones, they just keep coming, and they figure it out, and they get bigger and wider. And, whatever sort of move you have to put them down, they just flow around that, and boom, all of a sudden you got a coronavirus epidemic that's infecting all of humanity. It's kinking up our political institutions and our supply lines and our, whole notion of what normal is. What did this thing really start with? I mean, it didn't even have a name when it started. It's not even a real sophisticated biological entity. It's basically a clump of DNA wrapped in protein. It's not even as sophisticated as Captain Crunch or Fruit Loops. And it certainly had no balance sheet, no business plan, no strategy, no political following, no Twitter handle, no social media presence, nothing, no endorsements. Didn't care. Gets everywhere. So I became really interested in linking these explosive, relentless phenomena and how they emerge and rise and spread with the DNA of what I would call positive pathogens, right? If we want to build a more ethical, healthier, positive world, and many people are thinking about this. I mean, I think one of the wonderful things about the last generation, and certainly about the last year when this pandemic didn't really ring in a new truth, but it brought in a truth that more and more people realize, which is, we cannot keep going the way we're going. It's not all bad by any means. But we have got to harness better, more agile, more inclusive, more exponential way to get better ideas and better thinking on the move and leaking under, every door and around every corner and in every pocket. Because if you're not doing that, you're making a big list of separate topics and you get worn out. So I'll stop there because you asked a simple question that I will go on, as you know, for hours about. So I became fascinated with what would happen if leadership began to be defined as, can you create positive epidemics of what you talked about at the top of the show? Performance always, right? Metrics, results, impact, learning, which is adaptation, insight, innovation, different ways to do things, because we do not live in a static world. And we don't all look at the world the same way. So this exchange of learning and insight and experience is really important. And then third, vitality, right? If you don't have vitality in biology, if you don't have vitality, by definition, you are dead. If you don't learn in biology, if you have vitality, it's only temporary, you will be dead. And if you can learn while you're vital, but you don't perform, you become dead. So PL and V are essential biological attributes, and all humans have them. I mean, while we're having this conversation, our body is P performing at a variety of levels. And if we didn't, we wouldn't breathe and our heart would stop. It's also learning. It's adjusting to temperature or wind or, text messages coming in or whatever influences are in our environment that we need to respond to. And we're at least vital enough to be here and participate in a conversation on a forum about, can we create a more positive world? I believe the answers to those questions, can we perform better, learn better, be more vital, and have more people doing it everywhere, not as objects or commodities, but as participants and authors. I think it's possible, but I think we need a different operating system. And to me, epidemics say, here's what the 21st century is going to look like anyway. We've had 5 or 6 of them in this, 20% of the century so far. And so what would happen if we define leadership in this widely participatory, widely infectious, widely permeating way?
Yes.
And that question obsesses me.
Well, and where I kind of want us to riff, and I just want to say, Javier had put into the chat, he said, hey, listen, Mother Nature has all the answers. And I really agree with him on that. And if we know how to look, and if we know what to look for. So I want you to kind of unpack a little bit. It's almost like, what are the new lenses that we need to see? And you've laid out a couple of key distinctions here about really taking this idea of things that we already have in our bodies, right? The ability to perform, to learn, and vitality. What are some of those other key distinctions that would help leaders be able to see what you're saying, to see the capability to be able to lead infectiously?
Yeah. So I'll get geeky for a second.
Please.
From a scientific standpoint, the advances we've had recently, in the last 5 years, the last 10, the last 25, the last generation, in neuroscience, how the human brain works, in complexity science, right? How things organize in chaos. And that's kind of almost like a silver bullet. I mean, galaxies are out there light years from us. Again, there was no blueprint. There was no master control switch. And out of this vastness of space, we get ordered patterns. And so it happens everywhere in the universe. Biology is particularly good at going from chaos and randomness, the mixing of genes, the colliding of random individuals in humans, marriages, families, teams, companies. And in the wider biosphere, coral reefs, oceanic systems, prairies, rainforests, we see it, but we don't often ask the question, what's underneath this? And the science of complexity, understanding complexity is there. So that's the second one. And then the third discipline that's kind of worth geeking out on is this idea of network science. And of course, biology promulgates itself through networks. And so to me, all three of these disciplines become handy avenues through which leaders can begin to first reimagine our jobs. By the way, I would define leadership really inclusively. If you can help PLV scale, and you can help people create and participate in PLV, and thereby scaling it, you're a leader. You may have a box somewhere. You may lead outside the box. I'm less concerned with that because PLV at scale to me is what leadership is. And so if you can help make that happen, you're leading. So I would define leadership in a very diffuse way as well, even though you could measure performance or learning or vitality very specifically with very concrete data and very discrete bits that say, look, it's real. It's not just a notion. And so, if you talk about the lenses.
Hey, Larry, hold on right quick. PLV, performance, learning, and vitality, right? So did I get the
Yep.
Okay.
PLV.
So, and that's your definition. So you guys check it out. That's our foundation. That's our that's our bedrock that we're working on in terms of leadership. If you can facilitate performance, learning, and energy, vitality for life, you're a leader. You're participating actively in leadership. So this is our foundational building block here. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brother Larry. Keep preaching.
And then to build on that foundation, does PLV have to happen one time only? No. It's got to happen continuously. And it can happen only in one topic, how hens lay eggs, or how doctors perform physical exams, or how software engineers write code. No, it's got to happen everywhere. It's a human endeavor. And then, so this idea of scale and iteration comes into play. So leadership is, can you iteratively scale PLV, not in a static way, but in an adaptive way, wherever it's needed, however it's needed, by whomever it's needed, etc. And that's really massive. And because it's so massive, by definition, you've got to do it through networks and communities. I personally think the 21st century is inviting us to recreate and regenerate and reimagine human community. Because one of the things we know from these scientific disciplines, neuroscience, network science, complexity science, is that when you build a smart network, whether it's computers or humans, that thing can do what you need it to do to begin with. It can accomplish the task, but it also creates, via this strange, wonderful process called emergence, these wonderful new things you never even would have known when you started. And so when we think about leadership as a participatory phenomenon where we actively think about how do we create conditions where PLV can arise, how do we design interaction so that whenever Nicole and Larry bump into each other, they each perform a little bit better, they each learn something from each other or the work they're doing, and they're each a little bit healthier, then you can trust all these collisions in the universe to just start spouting this stuff off. Is it messy? Yeah, it's messy. But biology, or Mother Nature, as someone said, solves the messiness by sifting. Nicole and Larry got together. 32 good things happened. They learned 47 things, and they were healthier in these 14 dimensions. Do they need to count all that up? No. They simply need to say, when we got together, what did we do that was intentional, that we liked? We should keep that. What maybe was different that it was a surprise. Maybe it was, something we want to get rid of or something we want to add more of. And you can have that conversation. So biology is constantly letting these collisions happen, and then it sifts them. So biology makes tons of mistakes. It puts combinations together that don't work very well. It doesn't try to stop the act of combining. It just says when we combine and it doesn't work, that's just not going to have PLV. So it's a dead end. And so I think if you think about the implications, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Finish that thought. I've got a comment in here.
If you think about the implications, epidemic leadership is less about control and more about spawning a lot of participation, a lot of interaction, a lot of sifting, and then getting intentional about when we get together and do this, and we want to create, fill in the blank here, a top-notch company that, sells diamonds or builds tires or creates park benches, whatever you do, or we want to create a really healthy community that's defined by robust mental health, robust and diverse economic activity, and wide participation by everybody in whatever their endeavor is, education, home, yard, business, to create something amazing. Yes. Let's get to it, and let's continually prune what's most important to us, and don't stop the conversation before you have it, which is kind of what we happen to see in the world right now, right? We see people hollering about which conversation to have and who's right or wrong. That notion is, if you think about it, distinctly anti-biologic, and it's distinctly egotistical. In nature, the conversation happens, and then you say, okay, in this conversation, what stays? What should we keep? What do we like? And how do we know? And then let's keep rolling. We've got millions of generations to get going on, so let's keep bouncing it off each other. And that's how epidemics work as well, right?
Well, I want to pop in something real quick, because this is what Creciendo Consultores had put in the chat that I think is so critically, just so well aligned, with what you're saying. He says, I totally agree with Javier on his point about Mother Nature having all the answers. Our challenge, and this gets to what you were just talking about, Larry, our challenge is to pose the right questions, to interrupt our assumptions about, quote, normality, and asking questions like, what have we learned? What can be possible and better? What can we, so and you said creating those conditions for the collisions to happen, that those collisions must contain a trigger for learning. if I've got that right. And that's where
and actually they should contain a trigger for PLV, right? So let's just take coronavirus, the villain of the past year. And, we can all sort of see the coronavirus walking around with its T-shirt on saying, look, we scored and you couldn't stop us. Right. What were the conditions for that? The conditions were, if it could get into crowded spaces where people bumped into each other, and then it learned some things, right? It learned that if people were singing or drunk, or it was hot or humid, or there was poor ventilation, it would flourish there. So it doesn't have a mind like we do, but it's so prolific at entering spaces that by definition, it sifts which spaces and conditions are better incubators and which aren't. The beautiful thing about being human is we can be intentional about that. We can design spaces and conditions. Yes. The coronavirus didn't get to design its own receptor array and how well it could cross a human immune system. It had to play casino lottery games and just go billions of reps and say, you know what? It turns out that with people with more of these kind of receptors, we can get in quicker and easier and under their immune system. So nature honed that micro interaction between host and pathogen, disease maker and person over millions and millions of iterations. Humans can do the same thing, and we can add that to our mind. If we wanted to devise a positive epidemic, what conditions might we design initially? And then you have to keep, is this working? Can we make it better? Are there things in the way? And you can do the same thing with interaction design, and you can do the same thing with multipliers. We humans have been remarkably good at this whole self-organization thing as well. I mean, there were very few of us thousands of years ago. And now we're headed toward, depending on whose estimates you look at, 9 billion by 2050. We have become supreme at this whole self-organizing, multiplying thing. It's now perhaps time to be more intentional about it.
Yes. Now, first of all, I want to say, for those of you that are listening in live, or whether you're listening on the replay, as you're thinking about this, that last question that Larry just posed, I thought was very compelling. And that was the question about how do we begin to be thoughtful about, or even engineering those kinds of collisions that allow, it's kind of like, Larry, I'll say it this way, that allow our natural abilities, right, for performance vitality or performance learning and vitality to get ignited and to exponentially expand. So as you all are thinking about this and the work that you do with the folks that you do it with, be thinking about, when and how have I created the conditions for those kinds of collisions to occur, those kinds of rich, generative collisions to occur between my team, my family, my community? And what were those things that you did? What did you do? And go ahead and put one or two of them up in the chat. Hey, this is what I did. This was my PLV, my PLV strategy. This was my PLV moment. Let us know what are the things that you did. And Larry, as folks are kind of ruminating on that, you and I, in one of our preparation calls for today, we spoke about one of the things that you were fascinated by was kind of this through line, or this connection between there's personal change, there's interpersonal change, there's organizational change, and then there's kind of community, and then systems, that encompasses all of it, change. Right. So I'm curious, as you're talking with us about epidemic leadership, I have folks that are interested in looking at, how do I take this new frame? And if I'm transitioning from, say, one program to another, or I'm transitioning from one place to another, how do I start to put these concepts into practice? How do I start to think about how I might use them where I am?
I appreciate the question very much, because to me, we're talking conceptually right now, or have been to this point. This is really practical stuff. So in the organization where I was a CEO, I came as the new guy. I had been in another organization where we had been bumping into each other in stairwells and cafeterias and ER bays and ICUs for years. And so we had all the advantages and disadvantages, right, of that sort of solid network. I show up as a new guy, megaphone right beside me. I own the top box. Very, very tempting to say, hey, hear ye, coin of the realm. New guy says. Not going to work.
Right.
You and I talked also about the land that I live on. And for whatever reason, and like a lot of people, I've spent my career in environments that I would say are distressed or degraded or under duress, apropos, I suppose, of an emergency physician. And the land I live on was that way as well. I see a lot of communities that are like that, a lot of institutions that are like that. So there was no luxury for me to go in and say, hey, everybody, looks like your energy high. Looks like everything's going well. We learn well. We exchange information. We listen to each other. A lot of insight flying around, and our performance is it's almost perfect. So let's just make it tweak. A lot of us are in situations where there's a lot of history. There's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of despair. There's a lot of frustration or confusion or uncertainty, and that's the world that we live in. And I'm not saying that in an unpositive way. I have great belief and hope that with the right approach, these things can turn around faster, deeper, and wider than we think. And then they become stories that are incredibly inspiring. And I say that not because I just want to think that way. I've seen it happen. So in the organization that I entered, one of the things that occurred to me is we just didn't have the energy to tackle the list in front of us. And the list was long and it was really real, right? We were losing dollars. Our care and our safety weren't as good as they needed to be. People weren't able to generate new ideas and get them into concrete action. And so I think if you think, how do you want to approach this? I think it starts, as everything in biology does, by what I would call sensing, which we humans would call listening. Ask questions. Ask people, hey, what is your experience here? And sometimes when you ask a question that's that open-ended, you just get a lot of stuff and you got to sift through stuff. I think we can ask questions that are really formative, though. And one of those questions is, what are the really good things that you've been part of here? And what makes them, how are they surviving in this system? What's giving them life? What's giving them traction and currency? And how do we learn from that? And you can ask the other question too. What's in this system that's holding us back, that's in our way, that's obstructing us? And you can ask that at a variety of levels. You can ask that question at the personal or intrapersonal level. You can ask it in terms of how people relate. You can ask it in terms of workflows, et cetera. And based on that, when you go to sort of designing solutions, you can build these epidemics, these conditions, these design patterns, and these multipliers off of those sort of insights and shared experiences. And whether they're right or wrong, they always get people involved. And if you keep asking, what's going on now and what are we learning? Where do we go next? You have this flywheel of momentum. And you may have to work a little bit to get a few people in the game or be patient. You may need to, help people think about how they want to show up so that they're optimally impactful instead of just doing what they do. We humans are good at that, right? Well, this is the way I am. Okay, fair enough. Well, let's ask the question, how can we be most effective as the people that we are? And Nicole, you have disappeared from my screen. Are you still there? I may be talking alone to the internet. Let's see here. I'm going to go to the chat. Looks like you guys can see me. If anyone knows where Nicole went, type it in the chat for me. Wisdom bomb. We are all leaders and are doing leadership. We create the conditions for performance, learning, and vitality. Untethered here on my own radio show, I guess, now without Nicole along to guide me. I want to riff on that one a little bit. The conditions are, I think, just that: context, conditions, containers. That's one principle. The second one is this idea of designing interaction. Again, we've got really great neuroscience and social physics, if you will, that help us understand how to structure interaction, one-on-one interaction, group-to-group interaction. That's really, really fruitful. It gets people in what we call a neuroplastic state, most able to articulate, to listen, to develop new insights, new possibilities. And then the third thing is multipliers. Oh, she's back.
Yes, like as you were saying, multipliers.
What the heck was I? I was like,
Thanks,
I was
Javier.
off in Etherland just talking to you.
But I did come in on point 3. Multipliers, please continue.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to some of my experiences. In the book, there's a story about a school in Uganda. And the people in the school, the families, the students, the teachers, the staff, and the sort of nonprofit folks that were involved were really interested in creating something that was of longitudinal value to and from the students and the school and the community. And they asked me to come kind of take a look at it with them. Again, I'm the new guy, right? And being the new guy or gal is always a really huge disadvantage or advantage or both. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting to see the patterns there. The kids were trying hard, the teachers were trying hard, a lot of good things going on, but they really weren't thinking yet about multipliers. Mm-hmm. And I noticed when I walked into the classroom, the teachers would welcome me and say, class, we have a visitor today. This is Dr. Larry, from the United States. And they would say, good morning, Dr. Larry, huge smiles. Everyone stands up. Hi, class, how are you today? Just a great experience to see these kids, working hard. And it was a very, very poor area. And the school was allowing people that wouldn't otherwise have had a chance to get an education. Yes. But what struck me when I asked them how they were, they invariably said, fine, we are humble and obedient. Now, I'm not knocking obedience as opposed to disobedience, and I'm not knocking humility at all. I think a core to this idea of leading epidemically. If you're really going to create an epidemic, everybody counts, and no one has differential human value than anyone else. There is no alpha coronavirus.
Say it again. Say it again.
Say it again. Is that what you said?
Say it again.
Yeah. So this is a really challenging notion, right? You can be really, really good at leading, but the better you are at leading, the more you have to create room where everybody counts. They have different roles, different skills, different insights, different perspectives, but there's no differential human value. There's no alpha coronavirus particle that says, I will decide. This epidemic is mine. And so there's this kind of release process that happens. And so I love humility. It's not submissiveness. It's not meekness. It's just understanding we are part of. So the kids had that part right. And everywhere you went, and when they would gather the kids every morning, they would say, good morning, class, you students, how are you today? And they would almost scream, we are fine, we are humble and obedient. And so we had this workshop, and that was in effect a multiplier, right? This little chant. It wasn't happening in one place. It was happening everywhere. Now, if you're trying to break a cycle of poverty in a country that's deforested with 80% unemployment and all sorts of things going on tied to previous civil wars and Idi Amin and dictators and post-traumatic things, and everyone's lost a relative. I mean, that's a strong status quo that is not going to be shifted because we obey with it. And of course, that's my impression. I don't live there. So we got everyone together and we had this conversation and said, hey, what do you see here that you like? And what do you see here that's missing? And how would we walked through this, how would you set conditions? How would you design interaction? How would you create multipliers that would allow this to shift? Because everyone began shifting it together. And it was really interesting what happened. They decided to have a new word. This story's in the book. They decided that when the students responded, that they certainly wanted them, they didn't want to give up obedience, which was fine. It rankled me a little bit because I probably would take obedience out of the lexicon and replace it with something else like volitional cooperation with others or something like that. But not my place, not my decision. I'm the guy that was sort of asking the questions. They decided that what the students needed to do was to be able to create something from nothing. They lived in a state and a situation where there was so much missing that they couldn't even grasp what was missing. And yet in that state, there were big dreams there. I asked the students what they wanted to be, and I thought this was just one of the neatest things. They said, doctor, lawyer, school teacher, pastor. One of them wanted to be an HR executive. And then I asked them, well, what do you need from your teachers? And what they really wanted from the teachers was not just your lessons. They said, we don't know how to dream our dream. We're not there yet. I mean, this is profound wisdom from children, as always. They said, we have these ideas, but we don't know how to get there. We're old, we're 12, we're 14. And so we would like our teachers to share with us, how do you make a dream a reality? How did you do that? And what happened when it didn't work? So it really was interesting how things flipped around. And the multiplier part was they started asking themselves, how can we have more people having this conversation per unit time everywhere? And they started taking this word of creativity, something from nothing. Creating is to create something where before that something wasn't. What if we use this word creativity and we began asking, how can we be creative? That's the interaction design piece. Everywhere in the school, at lunch, at assembly, every teacher asks it. That we do it in our computer lab, we do it in our music program, we do it everywhere. And it's phenomenal what they've done. I don't know if you read that part of the book or not, Nicole, because I know you got a sneak peek. The school now is well on its way to becoming this incubator for innovative, energy sustaining entrepreneurs who are creating, food and local businesses, as well as getting, quote, educated in a more classical sense. And when you walk into school, what I saw at first was a brickyard, an old foundry with a fence around it, a brick fence, and there was trash everywhere, and the ground was packed and hard. And now when you walk in there, every bit of it is green, including the soccer pitch, and they're growing mangoes and avocados, and they feed the kids, and the kids help garden this. They all have to steward plants. It's theirs, that they do it in pairs. And they all get fresh vegetables now twice a week. And the school stayed open through the pandemic and even innovated and created approaches to put the students in learning bubbles. So all the schools around them closed, and they did not. So I think when you think about this idea of, and there's so much more here, I could go on for hours about this. There's technique to how do you create conditions, how do you design interactions, and how do you create multipliers. But one of the nice things for leaders is you don't end up hauling a rope with, tied to your teeth and a train tied to the other end. You get people thinking about how they themselves can be a multiplier, because you don't have to multiply 10,000 people. If everyone multiplies a few good conversations or creates a few more interfaces or goes to a couple more places, and you can get more people doing that easier, the math wins. I mean, casinos know this, right? I mean, you make blackjack simple, you make it easy to pull the lever, and they win.
Right. And that's what I wanted to actually have you break down for folks. Even in the Uganda example, there are a couple things that I want to highlight. Listen, you all, no matter when you're listening to this conversation and where or kind of what your sphere is, the same principles apply. The reason that I wanted to make sure that you all had access to this kind of thinking and perspective, I wanted it to start blowing your mind. I wanted your mind to kind of start thinking, well, what else could I be doing? How could I be creating some super spreader events right where I am? And I want to speak to a specific group of folks that I know are looking at closing down one program, and you don't know yet where you're going to go, but you've got 5-10 years worth of knowledge, understanding, networks. You have contact with all these systems. So Larry, here's what I'd love to do. You said, it's about creating the conditions, interactive design, and then looking for multipliers. So just in the Uganda example, what I love about that story is it started with the question. And I believe it was Felix or Javier that put in, there's just the power of the question cannot be understated or overstated, excuse me. The power of the question cannot be overstated here. So if you were going to treat this like a master class with a group of leaders that are in that situation, hey, I'm having to kind of figure my way to the next thing. I'm closing out one thing and I'm not even sure where I'm going to land yet, or I'm closing out one program. and I'm going into another place, how could I take just these 3 ideas, creating the conditions, interactive design, and multipliers? How can I be thinking about that so that when I land with my megaphone, I put the megaphone down and I start thinking more creatively?
Well, I think it's worth almost doing an audit on yourself, and you can do it with yourself as a facilitator and as a target participant, right? What sort of condition, under what sort of conditions do you most thrive? Is it easier for you to perform, easier for you to learn, easier for you to be vital? Because that's always an essential question. I'm amazed at the human capacity to sit in environments that don't work very well and endure. But we got to do more than that. We've got to sort of recreate them. So I think doing that personal audit, what are my conditions? What are the best ways I learn? And what are the best ways that I, multiply and connect? And how do I use those as my personal path to PLB? And then I think it's worth asking in an abstract sense, as well as asking the people in your new environment, what helps you/us perform, learn, and be really healthy? And then there's a design phase, right? How can we, because conditions are mental conditions, context, growth mindset versus fixed, for example, or being able to think in polarity terms, both and, not just an either or. So there are internal conditions that humans can share. There are also just spaces. So if you're leading a meeting, and it can be this tangible, if you watch a meeting a lot of times, usually one person talks, and then there are other people that are listening, kind of listening or not listening, or waiting to talk. And really, when you look at it, let's say 20 people in a meeting, often there's really only one interaction going on that's central to the work going on. There's one person talking and 19 people doing some version of listening or not talking. Well, you can easily take that, if you're thinking about multipliers, you can easily take a 20-person meeting and divide it up into 10 one-on-one conversations for 2 minutes. And then you can scramble everybody into separate one-on-one triads for 2 minutes. And then again, and now if you add that up, you will have had 10 for 2, then 10 for 2, then 10 for 2. You'll have had 32-minute conversations in 6 minutes.
Yes.
So the interaction density, the exchange density, the question density, the aha density goes way up.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, asking a question is itself a multiplier because it puts our minds, the parts of our minds that are more neuroplastic and more curious, into play. And at a neural level, curiosity is interestingly tied to goal-directed or generation. When people are curious, they tend to follow that curiosity to get an answer. They also, in their brain, link curiosity to, I want to create intentionality. So if you're thinking about a leader, as a leader, how do I generate motivation and intention in a group? You can pound the table and scream about accountability all the time, and we need a strategy, we need an approach, and we need measurements and data.
Yes.
Okay. Nature creates a lot of results. I mean, have you looked at a blue whale lately, or have you looked at these birds that can migrate thousands of miles in the dark without radar? The elegance is unbelievable. How does that happen? In the human brain, if you just get people asking questions and then create a lot of combinations where a lot of questions and insights can be generated per unit time, not because people hurry, but because the way you design the room, you're the way you design the rules of the interaction. Because you're a free being, Nicole, but I'm pretty sure I could be at the front of the room and say, turn to someone next to you and ask them this question and see what happens. And some people will cross their arms and say, no, you cannot take my Second Amendment right to not ask a question away, and I will not allow it. Okay, fine. It doesn't really matter because you're only one person of 20 in the room. The other 19 are talking and listening. So again, to win the math, thinking about how to design conditions, how to design interaction, how to design multipliers is a space that I've found as a leader is really, really worthwhile spending some time. And again, just for those of you on the show that are wondering, am I just yakking about this? And our organization, in Colorado, which was at the time the largest trauma center, we had $100 million turnaround in 24 months at a time when we had no growth, right? The country was depressed. When the economy is depressed, people don't go get their hip replaced. They limp around for a while and wait till times are better. So we didn't have some tidal wave of new people coming to us. this stuff adds up to real dollars, real cents, real metrics. But I think it's almost hard. It's hard to believe it until you actually think, how could you actually create exponential phenomena? Because that's the question in front of us these days. Incremental shifts are not going to allow us to catch up. And the coronavirus did catch up. There were 7.5 billion uninfected human beings. And initially there was one case. And if we had stopped it then, when it was really fragile, we wouldn't have had this thing. But we didn't. And it quickly went from 1 to 5, 10 to this airline, to this country. Boom. Right. That's the way we need to start thinking as leaders. And whether any given meeting is right or wrong, or any colleague is right or wrong, it doesn't matter. I mean, it does. But in the math sense, you got to win the math and just keep going.
And I want to say something to that point, because I love that phrase. It's like hashtag win the math. If you are watching this live or in the replay, put hashtag win the math. And what I love about what you're adding to that, Larry, is this. You're bringing in and maximizing all of these human factors that for many, 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 many moons have been disregarded, devalued, and just literally talked about as a bunch of fluff, warm and fuzzy nonsense. And so what you share with us through these biological examples and social examples, and I want to make sure this is clear for folks listening in, the Uganda school and what Larry just talked about as the trauma center turnaround, 100 mil in 24 months. He's talking about the same dynamics, the same processes, and listen here, the same level of impact. The same level of impact to be in the middle of a community that's bricked over, completely distressed. People have pulled out, and they've pulled out hope. They've pulled out hope for so long that kids they're not even sure how to do it anymore. And I would imagine some adults have forgotten or just, right? So that whole idea he's just described in these.
I want to respond if I could, Nicole. I don't know.
Can you see it?
Yes. Felix brought up this point. How can I create a safe environment for a mind share approach instead of a market share approach? So collaboration instead of competition. Again, I think these principles hold. This is an essential question, because if in creating conditions, designing interaction, creating multipliers, you're not able to actually foster this free exchange of what people can offer and what other people can see and understand and accept and appreciate, this stuff goes nowhere. There are conditions in the world. You can bang two marbles together and they're not going to turn into a frog. So fortunately, we know quite a bit about how humans do create trust. And I've had the opportunity in my work, it seems inevitably, wonderfully, and very unluckily, I guess, I'm always working with people that disagree, or they're angry, or they're irritated, or they don't trust each other. And it's been really handy. And again, I suppose that's life as an ER doc. You come meet someone on the worst day of your life, standing above you, who you've never seen before. We get about what I call 30 seconds to meaningful rapport, which is all about trust. So I think splitting people into small conversations. So if you take tribe A, 10 people, and put them in the room with tribe B, 10 other people, trying to have a tribe to tribe conversation is a little bit like going Fox News versus CNN, right? You're just going to get a lot of, this is what I think, if you get that at all. On the other hand, if you put people in small conversations and intentionally pair them with someone different than themselves, and then say, I want you to ask a question. I want you to ask the other person, what's the most important value in their life? And I only want you to listen. I don't want you to agree or say me too. And then I want you to flip. I want that person to ask you, what's the most important value in your life? Is it freedom? Is it integrity? Is it history? Is it family? I don't know. And then I want you to ask them to tell you a story about how that made their life richer and better. That value, take it from a value to a story. there are millions of ways you can do this. My point is, if you can get people into asking of each other, tell me what's important to you, tell me your story, and I will listen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, having people do that 10 on 10, you're going to lose attention. But if you just have them do that one-on-one, and then in the wider room say, guess what, square dancers?
Mm-hmm.
Take your pair and find another pair.
Yes.
And then pair A, which remember is made up of team A and team B, and
Mm-hmm.
pair B, which is made up another A and B opposites. I now want you to consider yourselves linked teams. So I want one pair to tell the other what you heard from each other that you found in common. Then I want you to ask the other team, what did you find in common? And if we do this often enough, biology works this way as well. When we are, single-celled organisms in our mother's uterus, at first all we do is multiply, and we're just the same cell multiplying. We create this big mass of commonness, which we might call common ground in a relational sense. And only when we have a big enough mass of commonness do we begin to differentiate into liver, intestine, skin, eyeballs, brain. And humans can do the same thing. So if you're looking to create this mind share approach, how are we truly a community?
Uh-oh. There we go. We're losing you just a little bit, Larry.
Do we just go off?
Yeah, we're in it. So you were saying when we are in the midst of, going from one cell to many cells, how do we create? You guys hold tight. The tech gremlins are out today. And Larry, if you need to kill your camera for a second, you can do that. I've got a solution.
Do that.
I've got a solution for that. Whoops. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right. There we go. There we go, Larry. Do we still have you audio? Can you hear us?
I'm back?
Yes, I have your audio. Go ahead.
Just fine.
Okay. So you were talking about that the biology has a great template for us as we go from these single-celled organisms that they only begin to differentiate after this kind of massive reproduction. So that's where we lost you.
Yeah. Yes, I don't know if you can hear me. I call this, and I think if you're trying to create that safe environment, help people aggregate a sense of relatedness and sharing. Or they may have differences.
So I'm going to ask you to repeat that again. You said, have people aggregate that sense of relatedness and rather than sharing their differences. Was that the backside of that statement? Oh, this is not fair. This is not right, my people. So here's what I'm going to ask that you do. So for those of you that were as riveted as I was with this conversation, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You can find and follow Dr. McEvoy on his LinkedIn page. So that's the first thing that I want you to know. Secondly, if this conversation about epidemic leadership and some of those key distinctions, right, talking about PLV, performance, learning, and vitality, or looking at how to use this process of questions, interaction, design, and multipliers, how to apply that in your own leadership. And remember, leadership is not the title. This is if you're somebody that's looking at how to cultivate and facilitate more performance, learning, and vitality, you're a leader. So we're speaking to you. You can go to Amazon.com and search Epidemic Leadership. You'll be able to find the book there. It is on pre-order at this point. It is set for launch later this summer in August of 2021. And I am hoping that I can bring Larry back for another conversation when I don't have storms going on my end and tech gremlins interrupting our connection on his end. And we can get you all back in the conversation. I do have to say, for folks that were posting in the chat, Felix, Javier, Robin, you all have put some wonderful, wonderful ingredients into the mix, into our conversation today. And this was absolutely fantastic. Larry, do I have you back? Do you want to give a final word? Okay. We don't have him back, but I really do appreciate, and Felix, I just want to end on this point that I love you put in the chat. I think that one of the main changes that the pandemic left us was starting to have this end-to-end ecosystem vision about our relationships. So looking at inclusion, appreciation, and collaboration, and looking for all of the ways that we have these inherent and innate levers for us to pull. So this is not something, you all, that is beyond us. The kinds of results that Larry was talking about are things that are it's literally in our genes. So I look forward to coming back to you next week. And I have a special treat. Dr. Larry put up some wonderful, wonderful distinctions about the kind of leadership that can make the difference for this moment that we're in. Next week, I'm going to have Javier Llerena come in and talk about what are some of the practices that we can learn, competencies that can help us learn those powerful, positive questions that can begin to create multiplier effects, and talk about that interaction design that Larry was talking about. So do not miss next week, you guys. Larry, do I have you back in? I saw your picture pop in, and then I think you popped out. Okay. All right. So I'm going to cut it here. We are at 1:01. Thank you all. 1:01 Eastern Standard Time. I want to thank Larry McEvoy for coming in and sharing his experiences and these insights from his book. I cannot wait to read it. And I want to thank those of you that are listening, whether you're listening live or you're listening on the replay later. So enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. And I look forward to bringing Larry back so that we can have a more robust conversation. But in the meantime, check us out next Friday. Javier is going to raise the roof and talk about what are the actions, what are the competencies, what are the things that we can do to learn how to enact some of these and to utilize some of these distinctions that Larry was sharing with us today. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And Larry, I'm going to give you one more shot. If I have you in, let me know. Oh, and he's out. All right. Great to see you. Great to see. Oh, do you want to give the final word? I'm trying to catch you before you pop back out again. Do you have a final word for folks, Larry?
I'll just say thanks for joining. Apologies for the network breakdowns, and I look forward to where you guys go with this.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to welcoming you back. We're going to have to do something about these tech gremlins, but we'll bring you back, and we will keep the conversation going. Thank you, Robin Stratton-Berkessel. It's wonderful to see you in the conversation, the OG positivity strategist that you are, and I will see you all very soon. Thank you so very much. Be well.